It's definitely an issue, but we've got Martin Lipton on the line. I want to move on to Spurs. Martin, good morning to you. How you doing?
Yeah, very well, very well.
I don't think anybody was particularly surprised by the outcome last night, given the way that the first leg went. But Spurs weren't really in this tie over the two legs, and I think that must be the most disappointing thing from a Spurs fans' perspective, given that they were in the final of this competition just last year.
Well, yeah, they were the second best, if not third best, from the first kick in the first leg, in truth, weren't they? They were utterly outclassed over the two matches by a far superior team. And sometimes you just got to accept it. I think Mourinho did as well, in truth. They're not very good at the moment. They haven't been very good, apart from the Champions League run, for 18 months.
Here's the issue. They're not very good at the moment. Is that because the players aren't good enough, or is that because the manager at the moment doesn't actually know how to get the best out of this squad?
Pochettino identified the fact that squad was wrung dry more than 18 months ago. The World Cup actually was the worst thing that could happen to Tottenham, because both Spurs and Belgium went really deep, which meant they weren't able to get rid of the players who they wanted to get rid of in the summer of 2018. And they haven't, as a collective, acted sufficiently since. And now everything that was foreseen by Pochettino is actually coming to fruit, or withering on the vine, in truth. It's a mess, and it needs a massive and wholesale change this summer.
Do you think Mourinho is going to be given the opportunity to oversee that change? Does he have the appetite for that change, and is he the right man to build a new squad?
Will he be given the opportunity? Yes. Does he have the appetite? That's to be seen. Is he the right man? He's got to prove it. Levy is all in with Mourinho, so there's no question at this juncture, at least, and I don't think it's going to change, of them ditching him. So he's going to have to get it right. Whether he wants to is another matter. To be fair, he hasn't misbehaved. I would have expected by now, given the performances, to have seen the absolute worst of Mourinho. And in truth, we haven't. We've seen a very different Mourinho to the one I anticipated. No, because he's on his best behaviour and recognises that if he doesn't sort it at Spurs, there won't be another job at a big club. And maybe that's part of it. But even his digging out of Ndombele would have struck a chord with most of the Spurs fans, because he just hasn't played. And he hasn't been fit all season. He's paid 60 million for a player who's played 90 minutes 3 times.
That is interesting, right? Because that was a bit of a test case where we see him giving out about one of his players. And we've seen that increasingly as his career has gone on. From, if you think back to the Porto days, and you think to the bit after that, where Chelsea, there was never really any of his players that he would have dug out in public. He was all about lifting them up.
He did. He dug out Joe Cole and he scored a winner in one game against Liverpool. He slaughtered Kesman. Just people forget it because of his winning games.
I guess because, what I really remember is Frank Lampard saying that he never felt more confidence than when Jose Mourinho told him he was great. Even Damien Duff, who he turned into a left-back from a left-winger, he did that in such a manner that Duff felt like he was an important part of a title-winning squad. I mean, look, Kesman, I had forgotten about that. Joe Cole, I had also forgotten about that. So it doesn't feel like he's the same positive force that using his personality to make the entire squad believe that they're world beaters. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, look, when he set up at Chelsea, he had better players and in a better condition, and players who were hungry to prove something. Spurs, you've got, if you look at that team, I think 6 or 7 of them are gone. They're either not good enough or no longer good enough. And he recognises that now. And he made all the right sounds when he came in because he had to. That would have changed privately, I'm sure. That he recognises now that the centre-halves have got no pace between them. You can't win without pace at centre-half. The full-backs aren't good enough on the ball. You've got to play with width and pace out wide. The central midfield doesn't exist. That's got to be changed. You can just about get away with Winks if you've got a powerful man alongside him, but you can't when you've got nothing alongside him. So I don't think Lucas Moura is good enough, and I haven't from the moment they signed him, in truth. So there's plenty there who just aren't up to it. Now, and then you take away the 4 players who are absolute certain starters in Kane, Son, Bergwijn, who he's bought, and Sissoko, just because of his power, and you're left with an awful mess.
Absolutely on the mess, right? But also, I suspect if you're Mourinho and you think next season I'm going to have those 4 players, and let's assume that they're fit, which is obviously a big enough assumption to make, that there's the bones of a decent team there. So how many players is he actually short before he could have a team that he says is his team and that he can confidently look at? Are we looking at another 2 transfer windows at least?
I think 6 players, so that needs to be either in 1 window or 2. I think you need a goalkeeper, or certainly a number 2 who can step in, because they haven't got that at the moment. Lloris is looking very vulnerable, as he proved certainly the first goal last night. I think the second's a bit harsh to blame him, but the first goal he definitely should have saved. Aurier's never been good enough. The left back's not been good enough. As I said, no pace of centre half, a proper holding midfielder. That's 6 players, 5 players straight away. You know, they need to be changed. If you get the foundations right, they've got the roof. Just they haven't got any foundations at the moment. You know, Kane and Son and Lo Celso and Bergwijn and Dele Alli make very good foundations, but there's nothing to stick them on.
And in that instance...
I mean, good roof, rather. There's nothing to stick on. There's nothing underneath to hold the whole thing in place.
Yeah, in that instance, Lucas Moore is a totally fine player to have as a squad, rotating in and out and playing a few minutes here and there. Like, you know, there's depth up front. It's just that it's been completely stretched at this point. Like, this is the type of thing that mostly Mourinho have been good at, buying defenders and building a defensive structure. Certainly the Man United experiment didn't particularly end with a very good defence. But he didn't have attacking players that Spurs have at that point. So I guess that's the bit. If there's any hope for Spurs fans who are looking at what looks like the end of an era, then it has to be that we have one of the best defensive minds in world football history in charge of a team, and his task now is to build a defence.
Yeah, look, I think it's normally easier to buy people who can stop teams than it is to buy people who can unlock teams. And Spurs have got the unlockers, they just haven't got the stoppers. So there are centre-halves out there, I'm sure, with the physicality and pace that he requires. There are fullbacks who can do what he wants. I think it's fixable as long as there's a willingness to spend the money. The problem you've got is you're going to get next to nothing for the players you're shipping out. Whereas 2 years ago, when Pochettino identified the problem, you'd have probably got 50 or 60 million for Alderweireld, you'd have got 60 million for Rose, you'd have probably got 30 million for Dembele, and you might have got 50 million for Dyer. Now you might get, well, you know, Rose is never coming back. Alderweireld you might get 10 million for if you're lucky. Dembele's gone, and Dyer is obviously having a really tough time. So suddenly, what was £200 million worth of players potentially to reinvest that money is about 30 million. It's a big difference. In
those circumstances, is there any possibility that he cashes in one of his other assets, that maybe a Dele Alli is somebody he looks at and goes, look, I'm going to get somebody else in, and I think I can probably still get a fair bit of cash for you? Does he have to become a bit of a wheeler-dealer given the ownership?
Well, that might be the decision. The Spurs have got the money. I mean, what I would say is the virus may have an impact on them, given that Spurs take more than anyone except Arsenal as a percentage of their income through the gate. Because of the amount that goes into each home game. They might have to, that's Daniel Levy's call rather than Mourinho's, but they'll have that conversation. Dele's been there for 5 years now. He's done pretty well, hasn't he? He's scored 50 goals. He's 23. He's a saleable asset. I suspect you could get 50 to 60 million for him. If that has to be, and I'm not advocating it, by the way,
yeah.
If that has to be the sacrifice to get the players you need in, then maybe you have to consider it.
Yeah. Martin, you mentioned the impact of the coronavirus there. What do you think is actually going to be the most likely, now that we've had a match postponed, tonight's game between Arsenal and City, what do the football authorities want to happen? And what will the government end up doing here, in your estimation?
I'm not a scientist. I'm not privy to government knowledge. I don't know what's been decided. I think that all games will be off after this weekend for 2 or 3 weeks. One of the reasons is that also will cover the international break, so it isn't. It won't be, if you take out 4 weeks, there's only actually 2 weeks of games because of the international break. I think that they want Cheltenham out of the way before they do it. If they were to announce now that we're going to have all games played behind closed doors after Monday, people would ask them, why not now? So you have to wait until the day before. It's even possible this weekend's games might not be played now, because clearly this is a growing crisis. We are the last people to have been impacted in England and the UK and Ireland, really, compared to the rest of Europe, where it's becoming increasingly difficult to see anything going on in the short term. But I think we're inevitably coming to matches being played behind closed doors in the Premier League. If it were me, I would just postpone the games in the lower divisions, because those clubs are absolutely, utterly reliant on gate income to survive. Premier League clubs less so, and the Premier League needs to finish come what may. If you have to play League One and League Two into June, you could do it because it's not going to impact on Euros. You haven't got any players away at the tournaments. Yes, they have a short summer, but at least the clubs exist. Premier League clubs don't need it. They just need to finish.
Yeah, okay. So behind closed doors as opposed to postponed at Premier League.
Yeah, that's the plan. They got to finish the season. If they don't finish the season, then the next season's ruined as well. Now, I know that public health is far more important than football, but if you assume that there's no danger in playing games behind closed doors, then it's absolutely incumbent on from the Premier League perspective is the season is finished, so they can determine who goes up, who's in it next season, who goes into Europe next season, what competitions they go in, where the prize money is spent, etc. They need to finish the season to do that.
Martin, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Cheers.
Martin Lipton there giving us some thoughts on Spurs and what's next with regards to the Premier League and coronavirus. 8:31 here this morning on OTB AM.